Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this fantastic panel, The Art of Commissioning, Funding Cultural Production. I'm really happy to be here with such an illustrious group of individuals who have been personally and professionally supporting the arts over many, many, many years and providing not only funding, but real genuine support in the widest sense. In addition to money, these organizations have been providing opportunities for cultural practitioners to produce bold work in different contexts, to be ambitious, and to take risks free from the commercial market. As we will see today, their support is via production funds, via awards, presentations, biennales, and residencies, which is a particular interest of mine. As Stephanie pointed out, I'm the director of Delfina Foundation in London, and we enable support and commissions through residencies for artists and commissioners through partnerships. And I'm really happy that a few of the panelists here today have joined us in collaborating on some of these residencies in the past. Recently, Delfina Foundation launched a series of residencies for collectors. And we've been looking at the role of collectors as producers and also the role of institutions today in producing new work, which has included Hara Kabuzian most recently and Mimi Brown, who is here from Hong Kong. Today's panel are a group of fantastic leading practitioners whose institutions have been producing the next generation of artists and who have been doing so through both public and private means. Now, we aim for this to very much be a conversation. The images are on loop, as you can see in front of us. We're not going to do long-winded bios. We're going to try and keep this as light and lovely as possible. So, on that note, I'd like to start to introduce you to our panelists who support artists and curators for various numbers of reasons. Some deal with artists directly, like Jam Acuzar and Nadia Samdani and Hoor Qasimi. And others support infrastructure for the arts in its widest sense, including Rosa Daniel and Leong Cheung. In fact, I want to start with Leong. Leong is the executive director of the Charities and Community Division of the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Many of you might not know this, but the Hong Kong Jockey Club is 130 years old, and it is one of the world's top charity givers. In fact, it was in the top 10 in 2015 and 16. Some 500 million-ish US dollars towards the arts in the last 10 years. So Leong, could you tell us a bit about the Hong Kong Jockey Club, as well as your strategy towards supporting cultural production here?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. So first of all, let me extend a very warm welcome for those who come into Hong Kong to join Art Basel. Some of you may wonder why a jockey club is involved in charities and why in arts and culture. And this is what this is horse jockey, not disc jockey, so nothing about music. So the Hong Kong Jockey Club is a very unique institution in Hong Kong. Like Aaron said, we've been around for over 130 years. We also run a very sizable charity trust, which now rank top 5, top 10 globally. So every year we donate about 500 million US on an annual basis. A significant part of this 500 million US is devoted to arts, culture, and heritage. So we take arts, culture, and heritage as one of our 4 key theme strategies, alongside with youth, elderly, and sports. And when it comes to arts and culture and heritage, what we really means is that we don't normally directly work with artists, but we do support infrastructure build. For example, the Academy of Performing Arts that we help to build and donate to build. But we also focus on audience building and then talent development. But very, very importantly, I would just want to emphasize this point, and perhaps we can go a little bit deeper later on, is that because of our nature as a charities trust, we really look at art, culture, and heritage as a tool, as a conduit to tackle certain social issues. So how do we leverage arts to build confidence and stamina in youth? How do we help sort of promote social inclusion through arts with disabilities, artists with disabilities, and etc. So I think this is one area that we're spending a lot of time and effort, and also putting our money in that particularly to promote social inclusion through arts.
Thank you very much, Leong. Like the Hong Kong Jockey Club, the Singapore National Arts Council also operates on a global level. And I'd like to introduce Rosa Daniel, who is the chief executive of the National Arts Council in Singapore, which champions the arts in the country. Whilst the Hong Kong Jockey Club is a private entity serving the public, the National Arts Council is very much governmental. Rosa, could you tell us how supporting cultural production in Singapore is part of the strategy as the organization in terms of helping to produce visibility for the country, but also growing grassroots initiatives?
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you, Art Basel Hong Kong, for having me here, and my colleagues are here as well. Very briefly, the National Arts Council in Singapore, it is a state institution. It comes under the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, and it really funds up and supports in other ways, beyond funding, advisory, facilitation, promotion of different art forms, visual arts, performing arts, and literary arts. Just as a start, I would say that we need to kind of appreciate the context that little Singapore is in. We are 700 square kilometers. We have 5.5 million people. So some of the numbers that you might see in the loop that's running, see it in relation to the geography and the size of Singapore. Commissioning for us in the National Arts Council is very important. I'd say that it all begins with telling the story of Singapore to our own people and to the world. Singapore is in Southeast Asia, and we have, while being a sort of young country of 50 years independence, we have, however, long ties to the region and ancient civilizations. We are cross-cultural, multicultural. We sit at crossroads of flows of trade, religion, civilizations. We seek to tell that story, and in telling that story of Singapore, we think that we also tell the story of the region and the world. So when we commission art, we are trying to do that. Our visual arts institutions play a great part in that. We fund them up strongly so that they can tell the story in the museums and the galleries that you see. We also want to commission art so that for arts excellence, for the sake of arts excellence. So we do believe in commissioning our own artists so that they can tell that story as well. And as importantly, not just to our local audiences, but also to the world. So I'd say that the second reason why we want to do that, firstly, tell the story. Second reason is really for artistic excellence. And I think thirdly, and we probably have opportunity later to explore this further, we see commissioning as a way of connecting with audiences, to bring them along and to really get them to appreciate and to connect with the arts, and for the reasons, as you say as well, to understand who we are as a people, our identity, but also to have certain reflections on social issues.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I think the idea of telling stories is an interesting way of talking about the commissioning of art, and also leads me to our next speaker, Hoor Qasimi, who is the director of the Sharjah Art Foundation. The foundation was established in 2009. However, one of its core activities, the Sharjah Biennial, started first in 1993. Is that correct? So 25 years ago. Since it emerged around, or it has evolved around the Biennale, supporting and commissioning art has been at the very core of the work of SAF, Sharjah Art Foundation. Not only telling the story of Sharjah, but telling alternative stories of the region, and also allowing different voices to emerge, including those of artists and also of audiences. So Hoor, could you tell us a bit more kind of about the strategy and philosophy of SAF?
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, the biennial started in 1993, but I was involved since 2002. And although Sharjah Art Foundation and the biennial are a public entity, government, it's very much a personal story, because I came into the biennial as an audience at the age of 13, and then as an artist who participated. So when I came back after visiting Documenta 11 in 2002, I realized what a biennial can do, what something like Oki's Documenta could do for an artist and for a person in the audience, like a public, visiting the exhibition. So I questioned a lot of things and went back and tried to get involved in the biennial and thought of what artists want, what does the audience want, and how can you put yourself in these two positions and create a model for something that really those two focuses are the most important, so the community and the artist. So we started commissioning works from the very first biennial I was involved in 2002, for the sixth biennial in 2003. And since then, it was very much something that we focused on. We also included residencies from then on, and we really grew with the need of what was necessary. There's not so much happening in our part of the world in terms of support. You get a lot of support internationally for the arts, but in our part of the world, it was very much, we're going to support charities and not art, or football games and not art. So it was really difficult for us to get this support. Now, after 15 years, suddenly we're getting more and more people who are willing to support, because you can't always depend on a government to do these things. So our projects really happen in phases. Things take longer, but at the same time, our core responsibility as a public institution is the community and the audiences. And through working with these infrastructures, so we renovate modernist buildings, turn them into community centers, do all this education program, and then the city can see that actually you are giving back to the city as well as helping artists through production grants, commissions, and the list is the list goes on. But again, it's really, we've grown organically over the last 15 years, basically through need. And so we started without a space, and then we started building our spaces.
Thank you, Hoor. As we move to the next two panelists, we move from institutions that have been largely publicly kind of funded and publicly minded to those that have been privately established in the public interest, and largely personally financed through a network of partners as well. I want to start with Nadia Samdani, who is the co-founder of the Samdani Art Foundation and the president of the Samdani Art Foundation, the co-founder of it, along with her husband Rajib. Happy birthday, Rajib. In addition to many incredible programs, the Samdani Art Foundation produces the Dhaka Art Summit, which has held its fourth edition in Dhaka, Bangladesh, under the artistic directorship of Diana Campbell Bethencourt. Nadia, when you and Rajib decided to establish a foundation, what drove you personally to do this? And what types of needs are you trying to address in Bangladesh? What was your strategy and philosophy for the foundation?
Thank you. Well, the reason, Rajib and I started off as collectors, and the reason why we started the foundation is through collecting and through travels to different biennales, exhibitions, museums, art fairs, we noticed that there was no presence of Bangladesh anywhere. So that kind of made us feel that, how can this be possible? There's a very vibrant scene happening in Bangladesh and nobody knows of it. And to the Western world, the definition of South Asia meant that India and Pakistan, and nobody knew of any of the other countries in South Asia. So that's how the idea of the foundation was born, that we wanted to create a platform for South Asian artists and to support them, to promote them internationally. And so the foundation was born in 2011, so it's fairly new and young. And one of the main events of the foundation is the Dhaka Art Summit, which is a biannual event, which happens once in every 2 years. We just finished our fourth edition. And it's become, and now we seeing through the Dhaka Art Summit, now we're seeing presence of Bangladeshi art in major collections, in museum shows, and we commission a lot of works for the Dhaka Art Summit, also for the foundation. And now we're opening a permanent space in Sylhet. You'll see some images of the Sylhet space. So we're calling it Sri Hatta Samdani Sculpture Park and Art Center, which we will house pavilions, which will have individual pavilions to house our permanent collection. And again, the main focus of the foundation and the Dhaka Art Summit and the Art Center is we do everything for the public, and it's free of cost, it's non-commercial, and everything is supported by the foundation.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you. Last but not least is Jam Acuzar, who is the founder and director of Bella's Artist Projects based in the Philippines, in Manila and Bataan. Jam, could you start by introducing yourself and also tell us about the philosophical approach towards cultural production and working across contemporary art and craft?
Thank you, Aaron. So Bellas Artes Project is a non-profit arts foundation. It started off as, a project. I had just moved to the Philippines after living in Europe for about more than 10 years. And when it was my father who wanted me to move back home and to start working in the family business, which is construction and real estate. When I moved back home, one of the things that I negotiated with him was to help me support art projects. I think the fear of going back home, I was speaking with Hoor earlier, is when you've seen if you're stimulated by a lot of things that are happening outside of where you're from, and the lack of infrastructure locally, it's either you wait for someone to do it or you do it yourself. And that's kind of what I thought when I moved back in 2013, that I just wanted to do something and be more involved. My father has a very interesting project as well, which is called Las Casas Filipinas de Acuzar, which you'll see in the slides. This is a collection of Spanish colonial houses dating from 18th century all the way up to the early 20th century. These houses were collected from all over the country, dismantled, transferred, and rebuilt on our property by the beach in Bataan, where our family is originally from. So anyway, when I moved back, I really wanted to see what was available for me, and that's when I stumbled upon one of the houses that we have in our collection called Escuela de Bellas Artes, and it was one of the first fine arts academies in the Philippines, built in 1867. A lot of the old masters, historical painters, and historical sculptors studied there, and is a very important institution. It led the way to the first official fine arts educational institution in the Philippines, and through urban degeneration was then abandoned, as with the case for all these Spanish these antique houses. And so this house is now in a funny situation where when we found it in 2007, it was inhabited by almost 300 informal settlers. It went from being, a fine arts institution to a bowling alley, a restaurant, at some point an abortion clinic, a brothel. And so when we moved it to Bataan, there were all these interesting things inside the house that normally heritage conservationists would think in a very pure and conservative way of restoring it in its ideal situation, usually in its Spanish colonial style. And so when I came back in 2013 and imagining what I could do with all these bits and bobs that we had nearby, I thought of doing something in that space, and within the spirit of this kind of workshops and collaboration. So the philosophy is that in the spirit of having, all these, back in the day, all the illustrious men, we call them ilustrados, the Filipino revolutionaries. They were the ones that were educated abroad and had moved back and became our revolutionary writers, painters. It was in that spirit of collaboration at the time that we wanted to kind of reimagine that space in Bataan, but not only to talk about all these, art, like ideas within art, but really to think about contemporary issues which these houses also represent, that is never really talked about, and the most effective way that we felt that we could create this vibe was to invite artists to come and stay with us and to live with us and to work with us.
Jam, I think
yeah.
you're bringing it right to the next discussion point,
Sorry.
which is to talk about the role of residencies in terms of cultural production.
Yeah,
I think you're getting
sorry.
right to that point. So I want to
Yeah.
kind of interrupt you to introduce that to the audience. And
Yeah.
I'd like to have both Jam and also Hoor speak about the role of residencies within cultural production. So over to you to continue the story and then to
Sorry,
connect
I'm
with
like, okay. So the residencies, yes. So the philosophy, sorry, I didn't answer your question actually. The philosophy of Bellas Artes are three, well, we try to tie in three elements, which is art, craftsmanship, and community. The craftsmanship aspect was, came organically to the project as my father was collecting these houses. Now we have almost 50 houses. And he realized in the beginning that it was kind of strange to bring imported tiles from China and put them in these houses, you know, and everything that was manufactured to be placed in the interiors of these houses. Normally, the interiors are also quite dilapidated, and when he was doing this, he realized that he realized that he wanted to actually make them himself. And so he then later on put together an organization of craftsmen from all over the country as well. So it's not just the movement of the houses, but it's the movement of traditional craftsmanship. And now we have 300 craftsmen that are highly specialized in traditional building techniques. We have one of the largest brick kilns in the Philippines. I'm not sure, it might be the biggest one because it's an industry that is no longer supported and has no market. But this is what we were suddenly interested in, was craftsmanship.
And this becomes a whole context for the artist that you bring to
Exactly.
Bataan, to engage with the craftsmen, to engage with the also the whole context of the colonial homes themselves. So when
Exactly.
they're there in like residence, like what is normally the process of engagement?
So normally we invite them to come and, well, first of all, our artistic director, Diana Campo Betancourt as well, we have a discussion together as to which artists we're interested in. With Diana, she's been very great with connecting also with all the different contexts that are happening in Bataan. Not just, you know, it's a World War II site, but also there's a nuclear power plant that was built by the Marcos administration that was never used and never operated. That's just there and it has this contemporary context. Nobody ever talks about it, and so we deliver all this research that we've produced to the artists that we're interested in inviting. The artist then develops a conversation with us through email, Skype, or however, and then we invite them. We invite them to come and stay with us. Filipinos are fantastic when it comes to hospitality, so we feed them. We have very intimate conversations and art conversations, but also non-art conversations.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of intimacy in terms of like
Yes.
production is very important when you're dealing directly kind of with artists. And I wanted to kind of ask Hoor if it's the same at kind of SAF, developing these really personal relationships with artists. And it's one way of helping to produce ambitious ideas, but also about placing them in a local context.
Yeah, well, when it comes to residencies, can you hear me? Yeah. To answer your question, we don't have a strict residency model because each artist is different and each project is different. So for a long time, we would say Tara Atwi is still an artist in residence, even though he's not there, because he keeps coming back. And one of the projects that you'll see when the slide comes, which is the number of drummers that organized the part of the music program and sound program for the biennial in 2013, Yuko's biennial. So for us, it's always interesting to continue this relationship with artists because when you work on a residency or a new commission, I think you're going to come up with that question later, but it's really important to have a personal relationship with the artist, have trust, have an ongoing conversation, because whatever the artist is doing, they're coming into a different context. So they're coming into a culture that they don't know so much about or they're interested in. So it's important for us at the foundation to be able to guide them, give them opportunities to visit places they would not have known about, sites in the mountains, the deserts, anything that could inspire them. Because in a way, the UAE is such a young country, so we're kind of writing our history through artists' eyes, which for me is very important, because you have to connect with the community and the local audiences, and if they can see something that they could relate to or discover something new about their own culture, then we're doing something right.
I want you to continue, because I want to take a shift to speak about production grants, which is something that Sharjah launched in, was it 20? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Launched. It's there, it's present. And although these production grants are available to international artists, they serve a very specific purpose for those from the region, because, as Hoor mentioned earlier, there are very little resources for producing ambitious projects, which Sharjah has been attempting to fill. And in a way, it also connects with what Rosa Daniels is doing in with the National Arts Council Singapore in terms of offering support for artists. Because you speak about the evolution of the production grants in Sharjah, and then Rosa, could you then take the mic and speak about production grants in Singapore?
Well, as I said, we started producing work with the first biennial I was involved in, which was in 2002, 2003. And it was important for us to also support artists on the off year when there was no biennial. And one of the first production grants were both launched at Carolyn's Documenta. So for us, that was really interesting to help support artists create their project that would be premiered somewhere else. It wasn't so much about Sharjah, it was about helping the artists with this project. We don't put a geographical boundary in terms of what we do. Of course, there's opportunities for everybody across the board, and it's a jury that selects. I do have to narrow it down from 200 to double digits. But then it's up to an international jury to decide. So it's really important for us to think beyond geographical borders, but to give the opportunity to people depending on the power of the project rather than where they're from.
Yeah, the whole notion of giving opportunity is really important when we're discussing, I think, production grants, because as I understand it, Rosa, some of the grants, perhaps the creation strand of grants that you have in particular, is also about supporting the production, but also connecting the producers to programmers and actually showcasing the work so that it can be placed in different institutions.
Thank you. So if you give me some time, I'll just give a kind of overview of a rather comprehensive suite of support that we do have for the art scene in Singapore. Firstly, we understand that sometimes you need multi-year funding so that you can build sustainable organizations. I think the arts companies, arts groups do need that. So those that are ready for this sort of support to build organizational excellence, we do have sort of 3-year funding to help them to become major players, in their kind of genre. So we have that, and that's kind of organizational support. We also have what you call project grants, and this one really helps with creation, with production, with presentation. And for this, artists and arts groups can apply for the projects that they're interested in, and these can run generally for about a few months, for a year. But of course, conversations with the Arts Council, if need arises, that funding support can be longer than a year. So there is a comprehensive suite of grants that artists can decide for their practice and their stage of development, what best suits them. Then there is another stream of support that's really very important for us to create works which we believe will help to stand the test of time and allow us to build up a body of works that really allows us to pass on to new generations of arts lovers. And those are our commissions. Arts institutions commission arts for our local arts programs, for the Biennale, Singapore Biennale, which is once in 2 years. We also do major commissions, of course, that see the international platforms. So, for instance, we of course participate in the Venice Biennale. We have participated in the Dhaka Art Summit. we come to Art Basel. Some of these are very deliberately commissioned so that we want our artists to be able to participate, not just locally to connect with audiences, but also to have conversations and presentations internationally. So those commissions are important. I'd also say that some of these residencies, which we support, and that's another stream of funding support, residencies also nurture our art scene from developmental stage to international profiling. And that support for residencies is both local with our university. Prominently, you might have heard of Center for Contemporary Arts with National Technological University, that Nanyang Technological University. So that's a very deliberate residency program for as many as, I think we've by now have about nearly 30 artists who've gone through that residency program. And for some of those residency programs, they are also applicable to people beyond Singapore. So if that works with our narrative and our curatorial focus, we do offer that residency support at the CCA, we call it. Last but not least, I just want to make the third point, which is that we also recognize in Singapore that while government funding is important, it's as important for us to really encourage a private participation. So how we've sought to do that is the Cultural Matching Fund, which is apart from we always had in place 2.5 times tax deduction, but we've also got a 1-for-1 matching for sponsorships, private sponsorships. So government also puts their money to patronage of the arts to match funding support. We've got something very interesting called the Public Art Trust, and maybe later we have an opportunity to talk a bit more about that.
I would love to talk about that later, actually, because I think it's a really special kind of initiative.
Later.
But before we do that, I want to just continue on the whole notion of capacity building in relation to commissioning, and to give you two different scales of it, from Samdani Art Foundation to the Hong Kong Jockey Club. I'm going to start with Nadia, though, however, because the Samdani Art Foundation produces this incredibly visible summit every 2 years. 300,000 people visited this most recent edition. Absolutely staggering. But throughout the year, there are a number of initiatives and programs that you're producing as a foundation that are quiet, that are workshops for artists. And also when you bring artists to either Dhaka or to Sylhet for research, they're often engaging with the local art scene. So I actually wanted you to talk about that, the often invisible work of the foundation in terms of capacity building through commissions.
Right. Yes, so the Dhaka Art Summit is a biennial event, and we invite artists every 2 years, 2 years in advance. So what we do, the artists that are invited for commission work, they're invited 2 years ahead. So they come multiple times to Dhaka to get a sense of the city, to get a sense of the building, Shilpakala Academy, and see what it's like, and to kind of engage with the local community. And then they give us a proposal and we make it happen. But besides that, now the Sylhet space that we have, the permanent sculpture park and the art center, so we've invited a lot of artists to come already, and just last week we had Monica Sonoska come in. And she was here for a research trip, and for example, she wanted to do, one of her dream projects was to do a concrete river, which she was supposed to do in Poland, but it wasn't possible due to many reasons, the law and all. But, so she, because, I think there's a certain percentage of concrete and greenery you had to. So this is a project that it's one of her dream projects which she wants to realize, and we want to do it in Sylhet. For example, Powell Altamar came in 2 years ago, and he did a site visit in Sylhet, and he fell in love with the community. As he's a community artist, he likes to work with the community, so he engaged with the local drug rehabilitation center patients, the village school kids, the village women. They all work together on his project. Again, it's open for the public. So for us, it's very important that everything is public, to work with the community, how the community will engage with the projects. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's a nice segue into Leong to talk about the Hong Kong Jockey Club, equally thinking about capacity building through the arts. And then maybe you can also make a transition and talk about the Central Police Station, which is one of the most exciting projects for Hong Kong that's developing in the next year, really.
Right. Thank you. Can I start with Central Police Station?
Yes.
No, just kidding. So when it comes to capacity building, I think the way we think about arts is it's visual arts, it's performing arts, it's also the form in the form of film, literature, and all of the above. So when we think about capacity building, I guess one is on talent. So even since in the 80s, we have set up a music and dance fund. Basically, we support a couple of students who would go overseas to pick up a master degree or postgraduate degree. So that's been around for like over 30 years. We also do 5 full scholarships with the Academy of Performing Arts. That 5 full scholarship every year, including one for a student with special education need. So these are on the people side, and then we also support choreographers and other supporting casts in putting together a production. But I think the other thing is also on institution. Right, so we basically donated to build the Academy of Performing Arts. We are the longest time partner with the Hong Kong Arts Festival. This is their 46th edition, and I think we have been supporting them since day one. In also a lot of these supports, whereby the money goes to institution, but we also try to work with the institution and say, part of our money goes to one, for example, in Art Festival or the French May, that we ask the institution to bring the global masters to connect with the local artists and also to connect with the local students. So that's one. And secondly, we also support we pay for tickets and transportations in some of these cases for the underprivileged class or for students so that they can enjoy the show as well. So to improve accessibility in that sense. I think the third point, apart from talent and institution, on capacity building, is also about building artists' capacity, right? So we have, because of the Charities Trust, we're very uniquely positioned in Hong Kong, whereby we practically have close relationship with all NGOs in the field. We have very close relationship with all schools, primary schools and secondary schools in Hong Kong. So again, when I mentioned at the beginning, we say using art as a conduit for social inclusion, sometimes what you find is artists, even they have that heart, they want to do something. The channel and the logistics side becomes a challenge. So we actually also provide that kind of platform that we work with artists and hopefully try to make that side of things much easier. Or in a way, they can also have a much better understanding on the aging population, exactly what they need in each district. And on Central Police Station, it actually serves as a platform to also do all of the above, including some residency. We'll try to.
Yeah, can you actually
as well.
describe, because it's like 14 heritage buildings, is that correct?
16.
16.
Yeah.
And
So-
2 new buildings.
Yes. So the whole site it was built in the 1850s. So it started to build in the 1850s. Now the original site was meant to be a police station, and then there's a central magistracy, and then there's a Victoria prison. So basically the police would go out there, get someone, come in and go make them through the trial and put them in prison. And many years ago there was actually still execution on the parade ground. So it's full vertical integrated, one-stop shop service for criminals. So that was the history of the site. Now the total area is about 30,000 square meter. Now there are 16 heritage buildings that we conserve, revitalize. We also have Herzog de Moron, who designed 2 new buildings, which will then become the auditorium and a contemporary art gallery, which I think some of you might actually take the opportunity this time to visit. Our apologies, it's still a work site, so please wear a helmet when you go visit this rehearsal exhibition. But in the site, because given its complexity and diversity in the sense, we can put on a lot of programs. So there is definitely will be heritage programs, definitely will be contemporary art programs, but also performing art programs. We have a laundry step Very beautiful. You should really come and take a look. And there are multiple locations you can also put on different kinds of shows. And education is also a big element on the site. I think in Hong Kong, of course, we have Art Basel. This is already the largest trade center in Asia. But I think the general public still needs a lot of education and familiarization to contemporary art. And we intend to make Dai Gun, the central police station, a stop like that.
Great, thank you, Leong. I think it also connects very closely into the next discussion point around audiences and how the Central Police Station is a wonderful platform, both for artists and audiences. Rosa, I wanted you to speak a little bit about commissions in relation to audiences in Singapore, which could perhaps be Singapore Art Week or the Public Art Trust, which we raised earlier. It'd be great to hear more about that project.
Thank you. So for us, it's very important strategic priority for the Arts Council that artworks really can connect with audiences. So our public commissions allow us to do that. We have the big national commissions, and there was a good moment in our Jubilee year, 2015, when we turned 50. There were major commissions that were happening in the national, in the civic district. These works can still be seen there if you have the opportunity to visit Singapore. Some are in the Padang, yet others are outside the museum. And those are commissioned so that there is a conversation in that year in our Jubilee celebrations about what we were, about who we are as a people and where we come from. Then we have got also a more accessible type of commissions that connect with local audiences, and that's out in the community. So we have community arts that we do commission. Some can be temporary in nature, yet others a little bit longer in terms of the site specifications and location is done for with the characteristics of the community in place. So that sort of commission is good for connecting up with local audiences. I talked about the Public Art Trust earlier. It's our belief as well that while the government has a strong role through commissions to connect with audiences, we also want to try to activate public-private kind of partnerships in this. So the Public Art Trust is a very interesting vehicle we started a few years ago, where there's some seed money, $10 million put in by government, and then we've attracted corporate support, a couple more $1 million, and we've matched that, as I said, because the private dollar comes with matching, so there was more government support. It's put into this fund, which allows commissioning of public art. And that really brings corporate support to art, which then is accessible. And we are very mindful in Singapore as well that audiences, and we'll probably talk a bit more about that, we are mindful that audiences are again at different stages of maturity. So artworks need to really reach out to them at different levels.
Great, thank you. Hoor, could you talk about the evolution of audiences in Sharjah? I mean, over the last 25 years in relation to the biennial, there's been this consistent engagement with the community there. At the same time, there's been this incredible international interest in Sharjah and the biennial. And how do you as an institution remain responsible to your local audience throughout the year?
Well, I think for us, the local audience is more important. As you notice, everywhere we go, we see the same international crowd, so they'll go anywhere. So for us, really, it's important to focus on the local because they're the people that are coming every weekend, every week. And in my time with the biennial, I've noticed the same children who've been coming to our events because everything we do is free and open to the public. And people who know Sharjah will know that a lot of children play on the streets and come to our exhibitions without parents. There are not many museums that where you see children coming into museums without their parents with them. So the children actually bring their parents the next time. So for us, that's really very important. And to keep these programs free is really important. Luckily, more and more people are willing to support our educational programs. We also have what we call the art centers, which are little art schools that are spread all over the little towns and villages in the Emirate of Sharjah. So you have 3 in the mountain region on the east coast. You have 3 in the central region, which is farmland, desert land, and we have 2 on the west coast, which is the city of Sharjah and another beach town. So it's really important for us to reach out and not just have a cultural district or an area that's brings people, but for us to reach out and be in all these little places. We also do, with our residencies, we invite artists to participate in giving workshops. So we also have not only artists in residence, but we do a musician in residence, writer in residence. With the architectural triennial, we're working on an architects in residence, and we're also working on a chef in residence. So there's a lot of in residence in Sharjah, but these things all happen organically through the different projects that we see happening in the art world and how the audiences respond to them.
I've been very lucky to both attend kind of Sharjah Biennial and also the Dhaka Art Summit. Most recently, when I was there on Monday after the opening weekend, so after most of the international people left, the schools invaded Dhaka Art Summit. It was absolutely incredible. And I guess I want to ask you about kind of the engagement with young people around the summit and how your programming has been developing deep engagement. So it's not a flippant, a superficial kind of engagement with the work. It is actually guided tours of the spaces and workshops and programming around certain artworks. Could you speak a bit more about that?
Yes. So earlier, before the Dhaka Art Summit started, we had this workshop called Art Mediation. And we had, it was an open call, and we had a lot of volunteers who wanted to be trained at art mediators. And they were trained to give guided tours and to speak about the art and how to speak to children. So the Dhaka Art Summit, I mean, last few editions were 4 days, and this time we purposely extended it to 9 days because we have 2 weekends, and in between we have 5 weekdays. So the last couple of editions, we only had one day for school children, and the tremendous interest from schools that they came and experienced, and it was like a lot of requests that, you know, can they come back? Would there be multiple days? And there's only a certain thousands of kids we can accommodate at one time. So this time we had 5 school days, 5 weekdays, and that's what you experienced on Monday. So we had these school kids come, we had guided tours, we had the art mediators take them around, talk to them about the art, explain to them about the artists, where they're from, why this project happened, and things like that. And then after that, they're given a certificate that they have visited the Dhaka Art Summit. So they're very excited. Even after that, you know, we do get inquiries from the schools because some of the kids want to do projects on some artwork, some on research. So it's a continuation.
And Jam, you're dealing with different types of audiences. So you're dealing with both the rural and the urban, from Bataan to kind of Manila. Could you talk about the differences of that kind of audience engagement and also the engagement with the artists as well in that collaboration?
Sure. So maybe one thing that I wasn't able to explain earlier is while we have all the residencies happening at the collection of houses in Bataan, all these projects that we were doing needed engagement with the Manila audience or the more, I guess, like the existing art scene. So so I decided to put up an outpost called the Bellas Artes Outpost, which is within the gallery district within the central business district of Manila. And a good friend helped us put together this space, and where it has a library or, you know, a salon type of space where people can pick up some books, have discussions, and relax, and also an exhibition space next to it. So we wanted to really, that was our strategy of engaging directly with the audience. The audience in Bataan is very different. It's, you know, Bagak Bataan is a rural community. It's mainly fishermen and farmers that were living there before we built the collection of houses. Now it's operating as a resort. So now there's several hotel professionals as well. I think we employ about 40% of the people in the local town. The audience there, I mean, are the tourists, of course. At peak season, we get around as many as 3,000, 4,000 tourists coming in to, go see the Spanish colonial houses, take selfies, some just to sort of step into this imagination that my dad had for this space, this place. Their engagement with contemporary art is still very new. There's a lot of guidance that has to be done, and in terms of like building our knowledge around this, it's a big discussion as to how we develop signage, for example. How do we have tour guides there, and Filipinos are very theatrical people. We're very emotional people, and the tour guides in Las Casas are very theatrical and emotional, and the houses carry a lot of stories passed on from generations, but hardly any facts. So it's problematic, because when we were training them, they were like, "Oh, so you mean that this is a magical?" And we were like, "No. Like, stick to the facts. Stick to the facts." They become audience in the end too. So I thought that was very interesting, that when you're when you have this time, this intimacy, when you involve people in the process of making the work, they become part of the work, but they become the audience as well. So over time, we're beginning to see that things are slowly changing. They're beginning to, specifically with the craftsmen, when artists come in and they ask them to carve, a geometric figure, when they're used to, very figurative, very Catholic imagery in their wood carvings. In the beginning, they were like, well, if my 5-year-old kid could do that. Now they don't ask those questions anymore. They're kind of changing a little bit how they think. And so in that sense, that audience is developing, and it's by way of doing rather than any strict educational or rigid structure. And then Manila is another different thing. The outpost has, because it's within the gallery district, a lot of the people's experience of galleries is really from a collector's perspective. So it's very commercial driven, with a few exceptions, of course, of artist-run spaces and university museums that support the non-profit side of Manila's ecosystem. But us being situated within the gallery district has brought a lot of funny comments as well from people asking why they can't buy the works. Why the Acuzans built an installation there, and they were very surprised to see that it was a Zen garden inside the space, and not understanding like what the point was from our side, because we can't sell the works, and it's purely educational. So the one thing that we've started doing is engaging a new public through programs. And so the library space is absolutely fundamental to this. When we're building the audience, it's become sort of a community space. It's for people that are not into art or are not familiar with art to come in, sit down, have a conversation with us, pick up a book. And at the same time, with the programs we've invited, it's been very clear when we've put together sort of the talk series, for example, that we want to invite, let's say, urban planners to discuss their relationship with the art. So we did that again with the Acuzans. We invited a very well-known young and energetic urban planner. Manila is a crazy, crazy city, and it was a much-needed conversation. And so with that, a lot of these young aspiring urban planners and architects also attended, and without the intention of seeing the exhibition, but when they stumbled upon this space and walked into this Zen garden, they were then the questions started coming in. And
it's incredible when you think about the capacity for art to exceed expectations. Sometimes they fall below expectations. And I wanted to use it as an opportunity to make a shift to talk about how do all of you manage risk? We're providing artists and audiences with these amazing encounters, and sometimes things just don't go according to plan. We're taking a bit of a gamble sometimes. So I actually want to start with Leong, partly because he's from the Hong Kong Jockey Club, used to taking gamble bets.
Risk-taking business.
To talk about how do you mitigate risks in terms of your support for the arts.
Thank you. I think to us, ultimately, it's art beyond appreciation. So, for us, we're not supporting a particular art piece and thinking that, it might go on forever, become a legend or anything. So to us, the more so when we look at what we support and how we support it, it's similar to other projects that we support. So we are a non-government philanthropic foundations. When we look at risk, we do look at social risk. We do look at sometimes reputation risk. But otherwise, then we try to support innovative ideas because, for philanthropic dollars, that's what we do. Again, we donate 500 million US a year, but that compared to the government budget is nothing. Right? Hong Kong government is 400 billion Hong Kong dollar. So 50 billion Hong Kong dollar of budget a year. So to us, 50 billion US dollar a year. So for us, it's very critical is how, when we spend the money, what kind of lessons do we learn from it? And then how do we then share that with the wider public? So then other foundations or the governments, the policymakers, they will have a better reference point when they would go on and do sort of more bigger changes in terms of policy. So I think that's how we look at risk. We are in the gambling business, so we understand risk in that sense. But we are also in the foundation business, and therefore we tend to like to support innovative ideas as well.
So Rosa, how do you balance the role of being a publicly funded institution that also has, to some degree, a bit of a mission around soft diplomacy, but with also giving artists the absolute freedom to produce?
Sure.
How do you balance those things in terms of risk?
So what is important to us really is about conversations, early conversations with the people that we want to commission to do the art. Well, of course, you have these things like contractual terms, that always protects both sides, but that isn't always the best way to go. Legal terms are never good. I think early conversations about what to expect, what we hope would come out of it, what are the objectives are important to us, so it's about conversations. We do have also expectations sometimes that as you said, sometimes what you go through is not quite what expected despite the best of your, efforts. So we've experienced things like technical risks, especially in the sense contemporary art, actually, it's really a nexus between, sometimes we think it's just also engineering, structural, understanding, site understanding, and so on. So sometimes the commission work may not turn out as expected. And again, in that sense, we do have, to think of Plan B. You need to have processes where you have conversations about decommissioning, about adaptation. That helps with technical risks. We've also seen teams where there is artistic disagreements along the way, and you think you've put you think that you've put the best team together. But sometimes, especially with creative people, visions are very different. And again, that process must allow for, hey, maybe it's a gentle parting of ways. What we do is we always keep in conversation with both, or sometimes even three parties, and people go on to do their work. So they carry on their own trajectory, but we keep the commission work together. So in fact, there was one very interesting example of the Venice Biennale, as important as that. And along the way, there were differences, and somehow we still managed to have the whole thing hang together because the work came out. Others with other opinions, they can go on to do other things like conferences and symposiums. I didn't get an opportunity just now to talk about the Singapore Art Week, but I do hope that people do come to Singapore because it is one of these platforms that we try to have a whole suite of things from highly, curated things, offerings, which are in the museums and exhibitions, to more edgy stuff, which does carry that amount of artistic risk, but we want to show that very innovative aspect of art in Singapore as well. So Art Week is really a platform that hopes to bring together everything, not just for local audiences, but every one of you, international audiences, to better understand in Singapore the how, in our context, we sort of support art creation and production.
Thank you, Rosa. Hoor, a similar question. So, via the role of Sharjah Art Foundation, in light of its international presence, its local audience, how do you mitigate risks in terms of artistic production?
Well, firstly, we should take a risk not only with the artist, but also with the location. So we've had through previous experiences where the conversation with the artist wasn't continuous, and we had an artwork that was, shut down by the police. It was a huge drama for us, but what made us realize that actually our placement was very important. Are we here for the international art crowd? Otherwise we could open up an art space in New York, London, but our community is what was more important, because it was the community who actually rejected this artwork and saw it as an offense to them. And with my discussions with the artist, his reaction was, I was surprised actually that I was allowed to do this, because nobody even followed through. So our responsibility as an institution is really to have this conversation and have this trust with this artist. I mean, we've gone to continue working with that same artist, because it's not about them trying to offend. It was a lack of communication. And I think when your responsibility as a public institution is really the audiences, and also, in terms of producing artworks or commissioning artworks, as Rosa mentioned, it doesn't always come out the way that you planned, or maybe the project doesn't happen. So you end up supporting the research that could end up continuing in a future date. So having this flexibility in terms of how you work is really important.
I think the element of trust is very important when you're engaging with people. I mean, whether they're an artist or an audience, it kind of comes down to that. It doesn't matter how many contracts and clauses you have in relation to it. It comes down to fundamental relationships that are at play. And so I wondered if Nadia could talk about some of the relationships that have been developed, both personally and professionally, via an artist, because Nadia is also a collector, she mentioned earlier. So there's also been commissions she's done personally, as well as via the Samdani Art Foundation. So I'll just leave that with you to decide which example you'd like to throw out in terms of trust in relationships with artists.
Well, when it comes to commissioning, and I think trust is a very important thing. You have to trust the artist, because you don't know what you're getting. But so far for the Dhaka Art Summit, whatever commissions that we have done so far was because the artists have come multiple times. They have come and seen. They got to know us, they got to know the foundation, the city, Dhaka, the Shilpakala Academy where the Dhaka Art Summit is hosted. And so a lot of times they have given proposals, and we thought, okay, this is simple, we can do it, not a problem. So there's an example. So there's this Indian artist, Mitu Sen. So she gave a proposal that she wanted to, this was for 2014, and she gave a proposal that she wanted to work with unpublished poets that haven't been, poetry that haven't been published. So we said that, there's tons of them we can find. So so she gave the proposal. After she left, we sent our team out that, let's go search for poets. And then as soon as our team went and was looking around asking, and that was the poets were kind of offended that nobody wanted to admit that their poetry wasn't good enough and it wasn't published. So our guys came back and it's like, this isn't working. We can't find them because their ego is so big. So then again, they came back, so we changed the strategy. We thought that, okay, let's go in a different way. That was, let's see your poetries. So then anyway, so it worked out at the end. She did a beautiful project on that. So a lot of things for even personal commissions, for us as collectors, we've commissioned a lot of things, and by surprise, we've always very thrilled with it. But sometimes some things, like for example, the size of the work was supposed to be a certain size, and most of we live in a 6-storied house, and it's quite challenging to take work upstairs because the service stairs isn't that big, and the lift a lot of things don't fit in the lift. So we commissioned an artwork recently, and it had turned out much larger than it actually was supposed to be. So we had to put a crane out on the roof, take out the windows of the building, and then put it through. But it's amazing. Well, these are the experience, and it's part of the journey.
Jam, equally, you're dealing with artists, craftsmen, audiences, lots of egos. How do you, how do you mitigate risk as artists?
I think what you said, trust, is incredibly important. And when you're inviting people to come and stay with you, and you're not just opening, space, but relationships with our family, relationships with the craftsmen that we work with, and also forgetting sometimes, because it's a very intimate space, that there are certain structures. And sometimes, we have in the beginning, one of our artist residents last year was quite touched by became very close to the craftsman, and he had very slightly became kind of a spokesperson for the craftsman, demanding a lot of things, and which led us to, in the beginning we were like, oh, we didn't consider, for example, so did you ever consider that the craftsman should be taking a break in between, like this and that? And we're like, oh, we didn't really consider it. But sometimes it's your response to it, and it's the action that comes afterwards that that you need, that is very important for not just the project that you're doing with the artist, but the continuation of the foundation, and to really live up to the philosophy of what you're doing. So he was, this specific artist that we worked with was really put us down to earth and asked us, what do you really mean about collaboration, and where is the collaborative aspect to this? Like, how are you treating the craftsmen as collaborators? And so this became part of, how we've developed our process with working with the craftsmen. Now, because of these conversations, and every single artist that we've opened our doors to have become our friends, and have become people that we trust, so they give us a lot of their advice. And so the residencies that are coming in, we ask them to spend a lot of time with the craftsmen outside the workshops, within the workshops, also present their work to them, so they understand why they're doing certain things, they understand the context of their work, and why they're also interested in them. Because sometimes they don't understand where that desire to work with them comes from, and it's, again, what Hoor was saying. It's communication as well. It's really being able to not just communicate directly to the artists that you're working with, but who's the community that's really driving everything? In the end of the day, it's, we have the houses, we have equipment, we have resources, but it's about people. Especially what we're doing, it's really about people, and understanding these responses, and carefully looking at them, and providing that continuation afterwards.
Thank you, Jam. I'm going to continue asking questions, but I did want to go ahead and open it up to the floor in case there are questions from the floor. I see a few people already with hands up. But sir, can I have you have the mic first in the front? Here. Can you bring a mic here? Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second, sir. There was another response I want to have first before your question. Sorry for that. I want to introduce Diana Campbell Bethencourt, who is the artistic director of the Samdani Art Foundation and Bella's Artists. And I wanted to introduce Diana because we talked a lot about artists. We didn't talk about curators and the role of curators within the production of knowledge and also art projects. And Diana, maybe I can ask you to speak a little bit about what you did with the last Dhaka Art Summit in terms of inviting guest curators, giving them the opportunity to produce works in relation to the region?
Great, thank you. Well, I think something that in terms of patronage and commissioning, what's really special about working for private patrons is also the ability to engage with artists in different ways. And something that I found in my time living in India as an American is also there's a few very powerful curators who basically dominate what Indian artists would be seen internationally. And when I started working in Bangladesh, I did not want to be that person. And so we all have our own taste and our own views, and there's so much plurality there are multiple art scenes in Bangladesh, and I didn't want to be that kind of filter. So I tried to invite in as many voices as I could with different perspectives to try to be as inclusive to open up different points of view. And I think also as patrons, when we talk about commissioning, like we've commissioned a lot of exhibitions. Like one of these exhibitions you can see at Parasite right now. But that support of the research, the support of some of the curators, like this was a wonderful thing that Nadia and Rajiv did, but Cosmin and I wanted to go into highly militarized hill track zones of Bangladesh, and that's not easy. But the kind of support to help us get the access and to do that research, and JAM also came in as well to help support some of the artist production in Bataan. And before I pass, I thought of one example of patronage that actually connects everyone on this stage, which was JAM supported me to go to Tokyo to see the sun shower show. And so we traveled together, and I saw Hotu Nayan's incredible 2 or 3 tigers. And because of the tiger myths in Bengal, I thought we must show this in Dhaka, but we have no equipment to be able to show something like this. And Hoor very kindly in the Sharjah Art Foundation lent us the equipment because the rental cost to ship this with the customs time would have been like over 70,000 euros. Great. And then the NAC stepped in and gave us a grant to help support it. And then the Jockey Club sent Tobias Berger to come and do research. And Aaron was also the chair of our artist award. But I just bring this up because it's amazing, like through commissioning, what we can all do together and these kind of porosity between these initiatives. So, yes.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you. And I think it's the central thing of commissioning art is working together and is developing sound partnerships that can not only support research, presentation, and production, but also go beyond that in terms of supporting artists through the longevity of their career. So other question here, yes.
Charles Merriweather from the Georgian National Museum, Belice. I just wanted to pick up on a word, if you will, that Hoor mentioned, Hoor Qasimi, which is location. And I wondered whether in this era, which seems to be moving increasingly towards a conservative approach to the world, and Trump's America is a good example, but also Central Europe. I wondered to what degree, in terms of presentations, propositions that you receive, the international still is very important. Whether in fact you find that increasingly this important issue of location in terms of the local community is the overwhelming priority, or whether in fact you are getting opportunities to be able to show local artists from your community internationally, and how are you determining those priorities in terms of international context?
Okay, thank you. Hoor, yeah.
Yeah, I think when I talk about local, it's of course the audience, but at the same time, in the way we work at SAF, at Sharjah Art Foundation, it is very global. So for example, this year's March meeting, we had a lot of artists and performers and architects and speakers from across the globe to talk about different forms of resistance. So in a way, like you said, in certain parts of the world it's becoming more conservative. For us, there are certain things, of course, that are illegal, like, very pornographic work or things that are offensive to various religions, all religions. So for us, it's really important to continue this conversation in terms of experimentation and having this global conversation. People always think of a conversation either south-south or looking at the west, but I think with our placement, we really tend to look across the globe, and I think this conversation is more important now in Trump's era and everything that's happening globally, because very few places in the world can you have artists coming from India and Pakistan working together, or artists, from Palestine being able to come. So I think that's a responsibility for the institution.
And it's great to see that, in the United States, while President Trump is attempting to cut the NEA's budget. I mean, thank goodness there's going to actually get an increase. But you have private individuals and public foundations still continuing to invest in the arts, which is an entire ecosystem and part of the economy. In the UK, for every pound that's supported or invested in the arts, you get £1.06 on top of that back. So there is an investment argument in regards to supporting artistic production, as there is in terms of kind of philanthropy and general goody two-ness. Okay, next question from the audience. We have one or two there.
I myself am an architect, and I've been involved in commissioning artworks in the past and hope to do so in the future. I was slightly amused by your more recent question, which relates to risk management, because in my experience with artists is that managing risk with artists is an uphill task at the best of time. And my question is especially to Rosa and perhaps to Leong, who both of whom involved, if you like, in a very corporate kind of environment in which, you have to justify your budgets and you have to make sure that things happen on time and so on. Is that not, to some extent, contrary to the nature of what art represents? How do you, somehow, in that constrained environment, enable artists to be spontaneous, which is, after all, what really art is about, and to sort of do the unpredictable? I would have thought one of the interesting things about having artists concentrated in some of your organizations and attending in-house art stays and so forth is that the results of that may very well be unpredictable, and possibly the most interesting results might be those unpredictable results. So how do you, I'm really asking the question of you two at the end, because I think that it's a hard one for you to answer. How do you create those genuinely artistic moments that result in something surprising?
Wow, is there a hole somewhere here? No, I think you've asked a very good question. I think for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, of course, I have to say, we don't directly generally commission artwork or deal with the artists directly. So generally, we support the institutions who then will go on and have a direct relationship with the artists. So to us, once again, there are two types of programs that we support. So one type would be like, in the arts festival, which then, of course, we have a long-term relationship with them. We basically have a huge trust in them. I think the whole Hong Kong has a lot of trust in them to bring in sort of good work in that sense. Now, the other type is what I mentioned, things that we support to actually promote social inclusion. So, for example, we supported this theater production called Hand in Hand Capable Theater Production. Now, the curator and the director, right, themselves are very experienced people, but they have never produced anything like that before. So what they do is they recruit people who have particular type of challenges. Some will be sitting on wheelchairs, some have visual impairments, some have hearing impairments, some have mental challenge. They then train these people all together and then actually put up a theater production on stage, charge tickets as well. So something like that, to be honest, when they came in, they didn't produce anything like that before. So that's the kind of risk that we need to manage, right? Of course, then we say, how do you do that? We go through each step with them together. We also help them line up, the NGOs who already have an audience base like that, so that they can, when they start, they can start somewhere. Right, sort of a more familiar space that they can start with, and then they can put in the arts element too with the audience. So that's how we, I guess, in a way, it is a corporate process, yes, but in a way, what the corporate process facilitate us to do, though, is to say we can maybe a better sense, given all the projects that we fail ourselves, to have a little bit more foresight on what they might encounter along the way. So hopefully, bring that to bear. So initially, we already know what are the risks and just put enough resources behind then those potential challenges.
Thank you, Leong.
Yeah.
Rosa, you want to quickly respond?
So very quickly, we are very mindful of the need for artistic expression in the Arts Council. I mean, that is really our raison d'etre, to support artistic vision and creation. So what we have is basically within Arts Council itself, we do have our own recruitment of artists as well, people who are familiar with different genres. So they themselves could be arts practitioners and they join the Arts Council. So that's very valuable in-house within the Arts Council. The other thing we do is that we set up panels to give out grants or to do commissioning. We don't do this in-house. It is always a panel, and the panel would have experts from those fields and different perspectives. So that helps us as well. And I think it comes down to what I said earlier, which is always understanding the objectives of what your program funding does. So there is a stream of funding that does sort of independent commissions and more of that, yet others where we know it is for educational outreach, is for community purposes, then we're careful about that. But there would always be that need to support independent artists. So I think that's how we try to manage a balance between perhaps where we sit, which is community or national objectives, but at the same time to allow for artistic expression to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Rosa. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Josh, and thanks for chatting today. I'm starting a residency in New York City. It's going to be the top 4 floors of the World Trade Center, actually. And, it's an exciting process, but for those of you that really focus on residencies, I was curious if you had a best practice or, that one tip that maybe you've learned over the years that I could benefit from.
What's your one tip, Hoor?
I know residencies are quite complicated, so.
Yeah, I think my one tip is to not have a rigid form of residency because each artist practice is different. I think it's important to invite people for a site visit and then figure out how it goes across the way. And with forms of practices, we also realized that we wanted to invite musicians and filmmakers and writers. So this idea of being flexible is very important, especially since you're working in a creative field. I think it's important to have this fluidity.
And just because I could add in that, since I run a residency program, you just think about the dynamics between being a guest and being a host. There's a relationship at play. You're also responsible in regards to that power shift that happens. And so think about expectations, yours and also your hosts at the same time. We might have a question problem for one more, if there is one more. I did see there was one more hand. Maybe we can get it to him. We have 2 minutes.
I have a question for Mr. Cheung. So there have been media reports about the Central Police Station opening in May. I'm just wondering, because there is an art galleries in the Central Police Station, how do you see the relationship between arts and heritage, and how would the Jockey Club facilitate the art galleries in the Central Police Station and facilitate local arts in by doing the art galleries and making it internationally known?
1 minute.
Thank you for the question, and perhaps we can take it offline as well. But first of all, we are aiming to open the site by mid-year this year, so there isn't a specific date confirmed yet. Secondly, the whole site will be about heritage, art, and also leisure elements as well. So the whole site, as agreed with the government, is a partnership between the government and the Jockey Club. Only 27% of the site will be devoted to commercial basis, so food and beverages and also retail shops. The remaining site basically will be completely for heritage and also art. And to us, I think we are also on a learning process. There will be a art gallery on site. And this will be probably the first art gallery that the Jockey Club will be involved heavily. So I think to start with, we obviously make the investment in terms of financial resources and time to build up the gallery. So I think that's the start of things.
Great. Sorry, thank you. I'm going to cut you off, Leong, because I have one last question. We have one last minute. And I want to say, quickly to each of our panelists, to answer the question, what have you learned through commissioning and supporting artists? So over to Jam first, quickly, 10 seconds. Each. Yes.
That it's very intimate, it's very personal, and you learn a lot about yourself and the people working with you when you're commissioning art.
Nadia, what have you learned?
You learn about the artist and his practice and the journey and the friendship that is built over time.
What have you discovered about yourself, Hoor, through commissioning artists?
Yeah, I think it's a privilege to work with amazing artists and to learn in the process. And our team has grown in terms of their skills and have created many friendships.
What's inspired both of you about commissioning artists?
In a nutshell, I think it's transformative power of the arts. A great commission just brings together everything.
Okay. You know. Last 9 seconds.
Open-minded and be prepared.
Thank you all for your open minds and for being prepared for this morning. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Aaron.